We have $100 million divorces. Blake's like, if one of us is getting $100 million divorce, then we're getting divorced.
For almost 10 years, Miranda Lambert said absolutely nothing about Blake Shelton. Not in interviews, not on social media, not on red carpets. While the rest of the world spent years speculating, debating, and picking sides about what actually happened between country music's most famous couple, Miranda stayed quiet. She let the song speak for her. She let the lyrics carry what she refused to say with her own voice. And then in 2025, she finally opened her mouth and said it plainly. And fans are still processing what came out. But to truly understand why this moment matters so much, and why what she said hit people so differently than anything else connected to this story, you need to understand who Miranda Lambert actually is and where she came from. Because this is not just a story about a famous breakup. This is a story about a woman who grew up surrounded by secrets and lies, who built an entire career out of brutal honesty, and who finally decided that letting go was more powerful than holding on. Miranda Lambert did not have a typical childhood by any stretch of the imagination. She grew up in Lindale, Texas, in a house where the work her parents did meant that betrayal was not something you read about in a magazine. It was something you watched happen in real time. Her parents, Rick and Bev Lambert, ran a private investigation firm. And when the Texas oil boom was making wealthy people feel completely untouchable, rich doctors and lawyers and athletes were spending money like the party would never end and cheating on their spouses like nobody would ever find out. That is where the Lamberts came in. Bev had a natural warmth about her that made people feel comfortable and safe almost immediately. She would use that gift to step right into the lives of the people they were investigating. Sometimes it meant beach resorts and casual conversations that sounded completely innocent, with a recording device hidden in her bag quietly capturing everything. Meanwhile, Rick would be somewhere nobody thought to look, hiding in the distance with a camera, waiting for the one photograph that turned suspicion into solid proof. And Miranda was not kept away from any of this. From around the age of 6 or 7, she went along on some of these missions. They would dress her up like a cheerleader selling candy for school, and she would walk right into a suspect's home with a smile that looked completely harmless. While the adults talked and distracted each other, she would slip into rooms looking for what people always leave behind when they think they are being clever. Love letters, hidden photographs, notes tucked away like secrets too dangerous to breathe in daylight. She never got caught. She never had to testify. But she saw enough to understand from a very young age how lies actually live inside normal-looking houses. How people smile at dinner and then destroy everything before morning. One case hit her harder than the others because it went beyond simple cheating. It exposed a doctor's wife who had gotten tangled up with a young drug dealer from another country. Miranda was still a child, but she watched adults completely fall apart. She watched the calm mask slip off. She watched how quickly a polished, expensive life can turn genuinely dangerous when the truth gets dragged out into the light. After enough of that, it stops being shocking. It becomes familiar. And that kind of familiarity shapes how you see the entire world. The stakes got even bigger when Rick and Bev were hired by Paula Jones's legal team. Suddenly, their work brushed directly up against the most powerful man in the country. For 2 years, they built a case connected to President Bill Clinton, and those massive files did not sit in some distant office. They sat at home, right there in the family space. Miranda Lambert literally grew up with the weight of national secrets stacked around her like paperwork. Then one day, a helicopter with no tail number hovered over their home, and Rick understood immediately what that meant. He started hiding what mattered. Subpoenas came. Ken Starr's team seized their file for the impeachment investigation. And the Lambert family, who were used to catching cheaters in parking lots, suddenly found themselves pulled into White House-level political drama. Miranda absorbed all of it, and somewhere deep inside her, a hard and permanent rule started forming. Cheaters were not complicated or romantic or misunderstood. Cheaters were the reason people cry. Cheaters were the reason people lose their homes and become strangers to their own lives. Her father, Rick, had another whole side to him that made the household feel even wilder. Before the private investigation work, he had lived what sounded like an almost fictional double life. He was a Dallas undercover narcotics cop, and at the exact same time, he was a frontman for a 1970s country rock band called Contraband. He worked patrol, vice, homicide, and narcotics. And when he needed cover, the band provided it perfectly. Music opens doors that badges simply cannot. He even said it helped him meet the drug dealers he was trying to catch because they trusted a musician in a way they never would have trusted a cop. Contraband threw big country parties out on rural land, the kind that could draw 30 people or 150 depending on the night, with flatbed trailers set up as stages and musicians jamming until the sun came up. Baby Miranda would crawl right onto Rick's lap during late sets and fall asleep to twangy guitar riffs like they were lullabies. Music did not arrive for her later in life as some separate discovery. It was already there before she could even explain what she was hearing. Then the Texas oil bust of the 1980s hit, and the wave the family had been riding did not just fade. It crashed hard. Clients disappeared. The phone went quiet. They lost the house. They lost almost everything. They moved into rough rentals in Lindale, and the change was not gentle. Rick spiraled into depression and drove back and forth to Dallas looking for work, his pride breaking a little more with every trip. They've held things together through prayer and stubbornness, feeding animals alone and asking God for something steady. Then a local preacher offered them a deal. He would rent them a white farmhouse with wraparound porches cheaply if they would renovate it. The family poured sweat and time into rebuilding it with their own hands. Miranda watched that happen not as a lesson anyone lectured her about, but as a truth lived directly in front of her. You can fall as hard as it is possible to fall, and still stand back up if you keep moving forward. That farmhouse eventually became a faith-based shelter for abused women and their children. The Lamberts opened their doors to people running for their lives. And teenage Miranda saw what that actually looked like up close. Women sitting at the kitchen table trying to plan their next step, trying to believe they could survive what they had survived. One story stuck with her permanently. A woman talked about loading a shotgun and waiting for her abuser to come home, because she was completely exhausted from being powerless. That specific feeling, that cold and desperate courage, later showed up word for word in Miranda's song Gunpowder and Lead. It was not a fantasy. It was a sound of someone who had actually sat with real women speaking about real pain. When Miranda was 16, she begged her dad to take her to Nashville for a demo recording trip. When it finally happened, it was nothing like she imagined. The people there tried to hand her tracks that felt like shiny pop music dressed up in a cowboy hat. She hated every second of it. She cried. She ran straight out of the studio and drove back to Texas furious and embarrassed. But that humiliation sharpened her rather than breaking her. She demanded guitar lessons from Rick and started teaching herself raw, honest country music on her own terms. Not long after that, she was fronting the house band at a legendary Texas honky-tonk called the Rio Palm Isle, standing on a stage that had once hosted Elvis Presley, Willie Nelson, and Brooks and Dunn. She sang into rooms full of adults, beer, smoke, and loud opinions while people clicked pool balls and shouted requests. That experience gave her armor. It taught her how to hold her ground when nobody in the room cares about your feelings. Her big national break came in 2003 through the television competition Nashville Star. She bombed her first audition at 19, giving a half-hearted performance that got her sent home immediately. Her mother pushed her to try again in another city. This time Miranda sang crazy and absolutely nailed it. She got on the show. When the first episode aired, she walked out and opened with a Hank Williams song that set the whole place on fire. She finished third overall, but she was quietly relieved because winning meant releasing a song chosen by the label, and she refused to give up that kind of control over her own art. Epic Nashville signed her shortly after, but she walked into that deal with demands that sounded almost outrageous for a teenager with no established track record. She wanted to use her own songs. She wanted to play her own guitar. And she wanted to wear jeans, not frilly dresses or sequins or anything that looked like a costume someone else designed for her. The executives were not thrilled about hearing that from a newcomer. She held firm anyway. And in 2005, her debut album Kerosene proved every single one of those instincts correct. It sold 40,000 copies in its first week and went straight to #1 on the Billboard Country Albums chart. The title track she wrote herself went gold and earned a Grammy nomination. Nashville could not ignore her even though plenty of people in that industry had been trying very hard to do exactly that. Then she met Blake Shelton, and for a while, everything about the story felt like the kind of country love song that makes people believe in happy endings. They had been close for years before anything romantic developed, connected through the small world of country music. They eventually fell in love, got engaged, and on May 14, 2011, they got married in a private ceremony at a ranch in Texas. They were everywhere together after that. Red carpets, television appearances, magazine covers, joint interviews where they laughed about being the lamest couple in country music. They seemed completely solid, genuinely happy. But in 2014, Miranda released an album called Platinum that felt bright and fun on the surface while carrying something much heavier underneath. Songs like Priscilla and Bathroom Sink were not just playful. They felt like loneliness and regret, and the quiet ache of watching a love story stay alive in public while quietly dying in private. She was writing about missing anniversaries and sleeping alone while she was still wearing a wedding ring and still living in a shared home. Looking back now, that album reads almost like a diary written in real time, with the public only understanding what they were actually hearing long after it was already too late. In February 2015, Miranda won the Grammy for Best Country Album for Platinum. She stood there celebrated and applauded and still officially Blake's wife. But the marriage was already unraveling behind closed doors. By July 2015, they announced their split after 4 years of marriage and nearly a decade of building a life together. The joint statement they released was polite and vague. It said this was not the future they had envisioned and that it was with heavy hearts that they were moving forward separately. That was it. No real explanation. No specifics. Just a curtain dropping in front of a locked room. One of the central problems had been the grinding, relentless distance of two enormous careers pulling in opposite directions at the same time. Blake was locked into long filming stretches for The Voice in Los Angeles. Miranda was constantly on tour, city to city, then squeezing recording sessions in wherever she could find a gap. Instead of real evenings together, they had rush hotel meetups and quick airport conversations. Over time, a marriage can quietly turn into two people sending status updates to each other rather than actually sharing a life. That kind of slow erosion does not show up on a red carpet, but it shows up in the songs. People notice immediately that in her major award speeches that year, Miranda did not thank Blake. Gossip outlets treated that silence like a confession, like the ending had already been written internally even while the public was still reading the middle chapters. Then by the end of 2015, Blake was being photographed publicly with Gwen Stefani, his co-host on The Voice. By early 2016, they were appearing together at events openly. The speed of that transition made everyone argue about the timeline. If Blake had been wearing his wedding ring just days before the announcement, what exactly had been happening emotionally before the split went public? Nobody ever answered that question directly. And because they refused to, everyone else filled the silence with their own theories. Some blamed Blake. Some blamed Miranda. Some blamed fame itself. The mystery became its own kind of story, and that made the public obsession last years longer than it might have otherwise. Miranda later admitted that she was not at all prepared for how brutal the spotlight would become during that period. She had asked for privacy, and instead the world treated her grief like a game. Tabloids dissected every tweet, every old lyric, every photo. Fans watched her perform on stage and tried to read meaning into how she sang certain lines. She described it as having an open wound and being forced to walk through a crowded room while everyone stays and talks about you. That kind of attention does not hurt once. It keeps hurting because it never allows the pain to settle into anything. So she did what she had always known how to do. She put it in the music. In 2016, she released The Weight of These Wings, a 24-song double album that worked like a complete emotional journal. Not just a breakup album, but an entire season of healing laid out in sequence. It moves through confusion and numbness and bad decisions and small sparks of hope and the quiet fear of starting over from nothing. Songs like Vice and Tin Man and Running Just in Case felt to many listeners like messages in a bottle, coded carefully enough to protect her privacy while still telling the truth. Instead of sitting down with a journalist and explaining herself, she told people that if they wanted the truth, they should simply listen to the music. Her love life did not slow down after the divorce. She dated singer Anderson East for over 2 years. Then in early 2018, while on her Live Like a Hippie tour, everything shifted again when she grew close to Evan Felker, the frontman of the opening act Turnpike Troubadours. Reports said the romance started while Miranda was still with East and while Evan was married to a woman named Stacey Nelson, who he had wed in 2016 and who reportedly had no idea the marriage was in trouble. Sources said Stacey found out about the divorce filing not from Evan directly, but from a local newspaper. The public reaction was sharp and unforgiving precisely because the irony was impossible to ignore. Miranda Lambert had built a powerful image around calling out betrayal. Her music had always taken a fierce stance against cheaters and the damage they cause. Now the headlines were painting her as the other woman in someone else's story. Fans who had loved her honesty started calling it hypocrisy. The fling with Evan lasted only a few months before collapsing by the summer of 2018. Then in April of that year, Blake posted a tweet about karma finally catching up with people, which fans immediately read as directed at Miranda, especially given the timing with the Evan Felker story circulating. Blake later claimed the tweet had nothing to do with her. He eventually deleted it. But screenshots do not disappear, and that single word, karma, became a symbol of something unresolved that lingered between them publicly for years. Then Miranda shocked everyone again by secretly marrying NYPD Officer Brendan McLaughlin in January 2019, just about 3 months after meeting him backstage at Good Morning America where he was working security. She announced it on Valentine's Day with a black and white photo and a caption about meeting the love of her life. The speed raised eyebrows in every direction. Some people called it a rebound. Others saw it as Miranda grabbing hold of a private life with both hands after being torn apart in public for so long. Brendan eventually left the police force and stepped into her touring world. Songs like Bluebird that came after the wedding felt like genuine relief, like someone who had finally found a patch of quiet after a very long and very loud storm. But then in mid-2025, another uncomfortable moment surfaced connected to Brendan. Videos appeared online showing him dancing closely with multiple women at a bachelorette party inside Miranda's own Nashville bar while she was not present. The clip spread across social media instantly. Sources said Miranda confronted him about it directly. His side maintained it was completely innocent. Fans argued loudly about where the line sits between innocent fun and something that looks a lot worse when your wife's name is on the building behind you. No divorce filing followed the incident, but it cracked open the old fears that Miranda's personal life was somehow stuck in a cycle where private pain always becomes public entertainment, whether she wanted to or not. Through every single one of these chapters, what never changed was Miranda's refusal to let the noise define her wealth or her sense of self. When country radio started playing significantly fewer women artists, she did not stay quiet about it. She called the situation out directly and challenged the industry's assumption that female audiences did not want to hear women on the radio. She told programmers to play any woman, even if it was not her, because then everybody wins. That kind of direct honesty did not always help her get airplay, but it made her a symbol for every woman in that industry who was tired of being treated like a side category rather than a main event. She also built something completely separate from the noise of celebrity that has nothing to do with gossip and everything to do with genuine compassion. In 2009, she co-founded the Mutt Nation Foundation with her mother, turning her deep love for animals into real rescue work. They have raised millions of dollars and helped thousands of shelter dogs find homes. They run adoption drives at concerts, fill little wagons with donated food and supplies for shelters in need, and send help into communities devastated by natural disasters. After Hurricane Harvey hit Texas, they helped evacuate pets from neighborhoods that were completely underwater. People who have seen Miranda work through the foundation say she walks rows of kennels, picks out the most traumatized dogs, and takes them home to rehabilitate them herself. That is not a public relations strategy. That is who she actually is when nobody is watching. And then came 2025. After years of letting the songs carry everything she refused to say directly, Miranda finally spoke. In an interview that fans immediately started sharing and discussing in every corner of the internet, she said plainly that she had let go of the bitterness toward Blake. Not that the past was suddenly fine or that the pain had never been real, but that she had stopped letting it live inside her like something still unfinished. She said it in a way that sounded less like a statement for public consumption and more like something a person says when they have genuinely arrived somewhere new after a very long walk. Earlier, during a 2024 podcast appearance when Blake's name came up, she laughed. Not the forced, uncomfortable laugh of someone trying to seem unbothered. A real laugh. The kind that comes from someone who has processed enough of the story that it no longer has the power to make them flinch. People notice that laugh, because there is a very specific kind of freedom that shows up when something that once hurt you badly starts to feel smaller than it used to. And Miranda Lambert, who spent years writing some of the most emotionally raw music country has ever produced out of the wreckage of that relationship, appeared to have found her way to that place. She is 41 years old. She has 7 Grammy Awards, 13 ACM Awards, and more than a decade of music that has shaped what women in country music are allowed to sound like and say out loud. She grew up in a house full of other people's secrets and made a career out of telling her own truth. She watched her family lose everything and build something better from the rubble. She loved someone who became the most famous breakup story in country music, and she turned that pain into albums that people still cry to and sing along with on long drives home. And now she says she has let it go. That is not a small thing. That is the whole story arriving at its destination. If this video moved you or made you think about Miranda's story differently, please tap that like button right now. It costs you nothing, and it helps this video reach so many more people who love real stories about real lives. Share it with someone who grew up listening to Miranda Lambert, or someone who needs a reminder that people can actually heal from the things that broke them. Subscribe to this channel if you have not already, and hit the notification bell so you never miss what we put out next. We are here telling the stories behind the stories every single week. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for watching all the way through. It truly means everything to us.